This is my design for a massive fantasy-themed Lego city, and this is the room that I'm gonna be building it in. In the last episode, we kicked things off. We established the visual goals, built a few prototype houses, took a first stab at some natural terrain as well as some architecture, and we concluded with a plan for the entire city. Now, in this second episode, we're going to be working on some of the key features of the city, and that's what all this chaos is for. So let's rewind the clock so I can show you just how we got here. Hey everybody, my name is Jesse, and welcome back to Project 99 Baseplates. Let's get back to the 3D model for a minute. Now, the fact that we have that is great, but I do want to make sure that we don't make the mistake that I have made myself countless of times in the past, where I would optimize for it to look amazing from a bird's eye point of view, only for it to kind of fall on its face if you looked at it from head on. And that is kind of the case in this room here. Now, to prevent this from happening, we need to get the model into this room, virtually anyway. And in order to be able to do that, we need to set up a primitive motion tracking system. And that starts with some motion tracking markers made out of Lego. And there we go. This is what the city will look like eventually, and it is awesome. Walking around the city like this does reinforce the notion that we need to be very intentional about which parts we build first, because some parts will become very hard to access as the city nears completion. As I'm leaning over with the camera, it's obvious I should start with the palace. That's the furthest away. And as expected, as I walk around the 3D model, you spot problems you simply can't see in 3D. And one of those is just how prominent this vertical face of the mountain is here. It's the first thing you see, and it's quite frankly not that interesting. So when eventually we're gonna get around to building this, we're gonna have to redesign that a little bit. Great, we've got a 3D model, we know what we want to build. We also know that we want to start with the palace section. So the question becomes, which part of that do we build first? Now, in order to answer that, we need to look at the grid structure of the whole city, which I was going to have to speak to anyway, because in your responses to the first video, and by the way, thank you so much for all the positive feedback you gave me, that was amazing. In your responses, the #1 comment by a significant margin that I got was, Jesse, why is this project called 99 Baseplates when there's clearly only room for 90 of them on the table? Yes, there is a discrepancy there, and while we're on this topic, we might as well address it. One of you actually stated very matter-of-factly that obviously 9 times 10 equals 99, and I thought that was fantastic. Maybe one day I'll make a t-shirt out of that. As a means to force myself to think vertically, I chose to shoot for a number of base plates that exceeded that surface area. It's really just a forcing function to think of this project in terms of layers above layers. As an example, I am planning to build a cave system underneath the castle, and that actually already may cover the additional amount of base plates we would need. However, when building the 3D model, I did run into a complication, and you're looking at it right here. You see, the square grid and the organic nature of the city, they don't play very nice together. In fact, there's an argument to be made that it is better to abandon the holistic square grid approach and instead give something like the palace section its own baseplate segment. This could, or rather would, have implications for the total number of baseplates we have on the table. For me, the number of baseplates in the title of the project doesn't so much refer to the surface area, but rather it signifies the amount of baseplates I would have to carry with me to a LEGO convention when we eventually finish and display this build. And I am certain that that number will equal or exceed 99. Anyway, back to our original question, what do we build first? One of the highest priority items to add to the table is the wooden support structures. but I want those to be in service of our design and not to guide it. We need a Lego-built visual anchor first, some key component of architecture that helps us understand where we need the supports and what size they need to be. I've chosen to work on the circular harbor first because it's a pretty recognizable element in the city and a lot of the palace is built around it. If this is all a bit confusing, I promise it will be much clearer in the next 2 minutes. Let's go build ourselves a harbor.
Now, this is the first prototype, and it relies predominantly on these 1x4 wedges. You can see those there, and there, and there. And then eventually over here is when they transition to much larger wedges. All right, so here's a Mark II where we've replaced the inner segment here with a radial that's based on 1x3 wedges. You can see those here. They're just 1x3, but these are still 1x4s. Now, the good thing about this is that it actually does give us the right number of columns that we need, but these don't align very neatly. So it's not gonna be super straightforward to build arches on top of these. I have these 6x1 wedges, and this arc is actually a little too aggressive. It's a smaller radius than what it should be, but generally speaking, this works. And of course, this is entirely legal. It's the next day, and I think I've got it now.
These are all scale accurate, and as such, we can start designing the scaffolding structures around it.
This is the winning design. It has the same curvature as this one does, but in a much more gradual faceting. Plus, it has the additional benefit that the columns can now be installed on a square footprint, which is amazing.
All right, we've successfully wrapped up this prototype. Awesome. This version has all the properties that we want. It's got the right radius, it's smooth, it's got maximal coverage, meaning we can place columns and things like that anywhere we want, or pretty much anywhere we want. However, the feature that took me the longest to implement was the ability for this prototype to be expanded outward. Let me show you what I mean. The thing that initially prevented easy expansion of this model was the fact that we have a hypotenuse right next to a straight edge. And because the angle is so shallow here, it actually looks like they're the same length. In reality, they are not. If you look closely, you can see that right here, there's just the smallest discrepancy there. If we were to expand this section outward, and we were to do the same thing with a straight edge, that discrepancy would keep on getting worse and worse and worse. You can see that right here. So this doesn't work. What we need to do instead is alternate which parts are being flanked by the wedge pieces. So in this case, it's the thinner plate here that is flanked by the wedges. But for the next band of plates, we need to alternate that to this segment right here, because watch what happens. If I connect this here, you can see that this wedge right here actually compensates precisely for the discrepancy that we were fighting against before. And what that means, if we now add this here, everything is actually compatible underneath the same grid, which is fantastic. And that's really the secret of the design here.
Now, the last decision we have to make before we can order a boatload of parts is color. Now, as you can see in our 3D model, the implication is that the natural terrain is mostly dark tan, and that's what we've been using up until now. However, I want to make that a little less monotonous, so I'll be ordering some extra parts in dark orange and medium nougat, specifically for the natural terrain. Now, the suggestion is that the palace is built out of tan or brick yellow, and I like that as its base color, but I also want there to be some supporting color schemes. So I built some swatches to try some of those out. And rather than picking a favorite, I actually like all of them. So I'll be ordering bricks in a variety of colors so that I can build some of these color schemes.
All right, now that we've got that last issue sorted, we can finally go on Bricklink and Lego.com and order the pieces that we need. So I just ordered all those parts online and it's gonna take a couple weeks for them to get here. So in the meantime, I am gonna be traveling to Italy and Spain to capture some reference imagery. Through the magic of editing, however, this should only take a couple seconds. So see you later.
We shot a ton of amazing reference imagery, which we will use extensively as we engineer our way through the LEGO city. For now, let's head back to the studio and see if we've got any packages in the mail.
Alright, so my orders came in and I'm really excited. This one is from lego.com and I must admit by this point I don't really remember precisely what I ordered. Let's go take a look. Yeah, so I think these are mostly organic materials meant for rock work and stuff like that, strata, maybe some terracotta even. However, this new batch isn't just limited to this. I also got a bricklink order and that one is even bigger. That is a lot. Just flip this over. See what we're dealing with here. Get this out of here. A lot of plates, a lot of tile. As you can see, all the colors fit the idea of natural stone really well. Cool, and then I got some other sets as well. We got a one-piece set because it kind of fits the theme of the pirate village. I'm not gonna put this in the pirate village, but I am going to build this. And then I've got the mini bonsai trees. I'm not gonna put these in the city, but I am going to build them and see if there's things that I can learn from these particular builds, which I'm sure there are going to be. And then lastly, I also took apart my Lego Coliseum, which is this big bin of Lego bricks. I'm gonna have to sort these as well. And I even decided that I no longer want my bare door in the house. I don't really have space for it. I'm gonna take this apart and use the bricks for the castle build as well. So that's an exciting addition as well. Let's get this one put down. The first thing we need to do is get all of this sorted. So let's go do that right now.
Just take bare door apart. Let's make sure we do that movie accurately.
If I'm gonna take this thing apart, I might as well try to do it the proper way. Let's see if we can make this collapse. Well, that was sort of anticlimactic, but I tried. Okay, now we can go sorting. Funny, but I swear it feels like I spend more time sorting than building. It's finally time to build this thing for real. Now, while I was taking apart the Colosseum, I was reminded of just how incredibly sturdy and rigid its foundation is. I can't show it to you anymore because I took it apart. All I have is this sultry picture of myself where I'm holding the thing. I kind of want this build to have the same level of rigidity as that one. And so first order of business here is to come up with a better solution for the foundation, because currently it's incredibly flimsy. I can just barely lift it up without breaking it. So let's get to that.
This is my first attempt at connecting the various elements in the curved segment, and it is a terrible idea. Attempt number 2, using clips and jumper plates. Slightly better. Attempt number 3, using ball sockets. This solution is both flat and strong. This is the one. Implementation at scale. This is getting exciting.
All right, quick update here. We've now got a definitive design for the smaller columns, these guys, and the thicker columns both. We've established where precisely this back wall is going to be. I removed the curving staircase that's going to lead to the upper story, and I moved it to behind the wall. And so in order to make sure that people understand that, this doorway is where that leads, I'm gonna put a very prominently colored light in here and in there to make sure that, like, thematically those two spaces are obviously connected. And then lastly, there's the pattern on the ground. Obviously because of the curved nature of this, the coverage isn't complete. There's gonna be gaps. And this pattern is an attempt at establishing a pattern that inherently has some amount of gaps in it to make the ones where we can't actually place any tiles somewhat less noticeable. And I do like it. However, I find this a little too formal and too regal for the lower floor. So once we've got the second floor installed here, that's where I'm gonna put this pattern. For the ground level, what I intend to do is actually use this pattern, and I stole this panel from the Eldorado set, I believe it's called.
And here you can see the blue light for cohesion. All right, at this point, we've answered all major questions. Let's get this guy across the finish line.
Activate.
All right, I am really happy with this build so far. It promises that the final palace build is gonna be absolutely gargantuan, and I am so here for it. Just to remind you, this build is actually only a very small portion of what will eventually become the whole palace section. You can see that here in the 3D model. It does really put the insane scale of the whole palace in perspective. Now remember, at the start of this episode, I said that one of the most important things to get built first was the wooden scaffolding, and I haven't talked about that at all. And that's really because I expect that the wooden scaffolding will start somewhere around this build, but because we still have to expand this outward in order to support the next stories that we have to build on top of this, I simply didn't get around to it. So that is something that I expect we will do in the next episode. Another thing we talked about earlier is how the structure is going to fit on the base plate grid pattern, and that remains an unsolved problem. At the end of the day, there's just not really a good way to place a curved structure on a square grid. You can kind of see that here. While there are ways to fit structures diagonally onto an otherwise square grid pattern, like you see here, the reality is it just doesn't really work as well for a curved element. This doesn't really fit on top of this, no matter whether it's angled or not. So this is something that we're gonna have to figure out.
Activate.
All right, we need to get this episode out of the door. Now, I just wanted to acknowledge that I too feel like the time between episodes needs to come down, and I will do my best to make that happen. Because the harbor is such a technical build, I believe that many of the solutions that we arrived at are going to carry over into the expansions of the harbor. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we can get episode 3 done a little quicker, but I guess we'll find out. I also wanted to send a special thanks to all the people who have liked, commented, subscribed, and this channel is off to a great start just because of you. All right, that's really it for me. I will see you all in the next episode of Project 99 Baseplates.